to be proud of.
Wolverhampton Wanderers, hopefully this time they can do the business.
Hello there, and welcome to the latest episode of the E&S Wolves podcast, brought to you by the Express and Star and in association with the University of Wolverhampton at the Halls. My name is Johnny Drury. As always, I'm here with the Wolves expert, the Wolves correspondent for the E&S, Mr. Liam Keene. After, unfortunately for Wolves, the unbeaten run came to an end, but it was a battling display at Manchester City, and things are still looking better than they were a few weeks ago. Keeno, how are you, mate? How was your trip to Manchester? Not the best result, but could have been a lot worse if the game was probably earlier in the campaign.
Yeah, definitely. It was all right, mate, to be honest. I mean, it was a quick, sort of relatively quick trip, really. I don't know if it sounds weird, but it was almost like a bit of a blur. Like, there was no traffic there, get there, no traffic on the way back. The game was fairly routine. And I just woke up the next day and was like, did I even work yesterday? I don't even know what happened. I just sort of managed to sort of drag myself through it. I did also as well stay up after the game, got back home, finished all my work. I finished work at about sort of 11ish. And then I stayed at sort of 6 a.m. watching UFC over in America. So it was a bit of a late one. Then going into Sunday, I was up at about 10:15 in the morning to go to church for preparing for the wedding and
praying for a relegation survival, Premier League survival.
Look, it was fine. I got on okay. It's not necessarily the way I would have chosen to spend my morning, but we're getting ready for our wedding, so things have got to be done. Mate, it's been a bit of honestly, I woke up this morning in a little bit of a blur. I'm trying to remember exactly where I am, but it was an interesting trip. Everything all good with you, mate? Otherwise, same old.
All right, mate. Yeah, I had a weekend of wedding stuff as well. I booked my wedding. So
you booked it?
Yeah, the old
Nice.
back pocket, the old wallet started taking a battering now, and I'm sure it'll only just keep getting worse between now and the wedding day. So yeah, busy weekend, mate. Busy weekend, but yeah, all good. I believe you had a bit of a funny one up at Manchester City. So I'm hearing through the grapevine some Wolves involving some Wolves fans and some Wolves players who may not be in the building in a few weeks' time.
Yeah,
the floor is yours to explain all this to the Wolves fans.
I'll try not to drag it on too much. I mean, obviously, I'm a Wolves fan myself, but it's you have a slightly different relationship with a club and sort of support, if you will, when you're in this kind of job. So when I say this sentence, this hopefully will make sense in context, but Wolves fans are brilliant when you see them out and about. I mean, they're loud, they're boisterous. They want to have their say. They're brilliant to deal with. And I was at Man City where we're sort of sat in the press box. Just there's a bit of a sort of gap, and then there's a load of rows of sort of hospitality seats. I think they're hospitality anyway. They're sort of the bit posher seats. I'm guessing that's what they are. And there was one guy with a group. He was coming up and down the stairs, and he sort of caught my attention at one point. He was going, Liam. I didn't know where he was. I was trying to find him, and he saw him, and he was like, up the walls, giving me grabbing his student. He obviously wasn't wearing a shirt, but he was giving it some. And I was laughing, and I was enjoying that. And he did that a couple of times, coming back and forth to his seat. And then at one point, and he's actually tweeted me a picture yesterday, which was really funny. It's quite a funny picture. You can see me in the background. He took a selfie from about 7 or 8 meters away from me. With a load of fans
I saw this
as well.
In the rounds on Twitter.
Actually. Yeah. He took a selfie because he was going, Liam, and he took it with me in the background. I'm just laughing in the background. He seemed like a nice lad. So fair play. That was really funny. But then, honestly, it got even funnier. So you go down to the mix zone, and the mix zone, which is, for people that don't know, I have mentioned it before, but it's a sort of an industry term. A mix zone is the area where you stand there, sort of basically a corridor with the players walking past you, try and stop them for interviews, basically. So then the mix zone, and at City, it's a brilliant mix zone because the players have to walk past to exit the building, whereas at some clubs, it's not the case. And obviously players are trying to avoid walking past if they can. I always make sure I do the mix zone when I'm at City. And I was waiting for ages on this occasion. The players were taking so long to come out, and I was just milling around. In front of me is a sort of advertising boarding and it's glass. and you can't really see through it. You can maybe see a tiny little bit through it, but you can't really see properly. Like I can sort of make out there's people behind it, but I can't really make out faces or anything like that. And then quickly realised, look, I was on my phone, some guys tweeting me a picture. There's Wolves fans on the other side of it, all in these. I'm guessing it's hospitality again. Sort of sat there on these tables. They were taking videos and pictures and tweeting them to me. Then Mark Gahey comes down and he's doing an interview with a load of other journalists. Obviously, I'm not interviewing him because it's not my job to do that. And I'm stood there, sort of just to the side. And they start banging on the glass while Mark Gahey's getting this interview, banging on the glass to try and get my attention, which did make me laugh. I was trying to hold it together. A few of them like waving and smiling and everything. So, I mean, it did give me a good laugh. So it was.
I'm just looking at the picture now. It's absolutely hilarious.
Because there's other Man City fans that are like posing as well, but I'm in the background in the mix.
You look like a young fan waiting for autographs.
So that was. So you're talking about the mix zone picture? Yeah. That mix zone picture is funny as well. Because I'm stood there on my phone and he's taking a picture. There was a video which I don't think it's out there now. I think it might be deleted. But and to be fair, that same guy tweeted me a bit later on. Praise him, saying how stood there for ages and all that kind of stuff, trying to get interviews, and he was being very kind. So I appreciate that. He's been very nice. So yeah, the Wolves fans were great. They were brilliant, and it just did give me a good laugh. And then what made it even more interesting down in that mix zone is, and obviously,
I know what's coming here. I can sense what's coming.
You can sense. I mean, I've got a good relationship with the club, and they understand that I've got to do my job, and I obviously told them I was going to do this, and they knew it was going to happen. I was like, right, well, while I'm stood here, I want to get an interview that's, actually worthwhile in terms of the game, which I did. I spoke to Ladislav Krejci. He was really good, got some good stuff from him. So that's great. But while I was there, I was like, well, if they walk past, I'm going to have to ask players like Emmanuel Agbadou, Fer Lopez, Jorgen Strand Larsen, those three obviously being three that could go. Fer will come on to a little bit later because he is going now. We'll come on to that in the podcast. But yeah, those three at the time, I was like, right, well, I've got to ask them if they come past. Emmanuel Agbadou comes past. He didn't really. I don't think he quite heard me. He didn't really understand what I was asking him. I said, "I'll double down like a quick interview," and he sort of looked at the Wolves media staff, looked at me, and just sort of went, "Nah." I was like, "Okay, fine." Yeah, I mean, I expected that. No problem. See you later. Fer Lopez comes past. Ask him. He looks at the Wolves media staff. He sort of stops, turns to me, and he's almost like he's going to do it. The Wolves media staff are clearly giving him a vibe, being like, "Don't do it," which did make me laugh. Although I don't think he'd have been that. I don't think he'd have said anything that bad. And they did say that to me afterwards. They were like, well, he probably would have been fine, really. And then he sort of turned to me and he went, depends what the questions are going to be. And I sort of paused and went, just about the game? Bearing in mind that he didn't play. He didn't even come on. And I was like, yeah, I'm not really going to get away with that. And he sort of chuckled and went, no, sorry, and walked off. I was like, okay, fair enough. And yeah, Fer Lopez is a pretty nice lad, so I've got no and Agbadou's fine as well, so I've got no issue with them saying no. Players always do, and they say yes, say no, not an issue. And then this is the golden goose, Jorgen Strand Larsen, all the interest in him. He's a good talker, he's a good guy. I'm like, there's a chance he might do it. I said the odds are against me, but you never know. He might say yes, and I get like Mo Salah stopping that famous Liverpool interview from a couple of months ago, something like that. And I'm like, oh, imagine if I get this right, let's give it a go. And the Wolves staff are there, and they were sort of laughing. He's like, he's not going to stop. I'm like, yeah, he's probably not, but I've got to give it a go, haven't I? And then he walks.
You don't get Keeno.
He's starting to walk towards me, and I turn to the Wolves media staff. I'm going, right, it's the hat trick now. I'm going to go for it. I'm going to get the hat trick of rejections. Let's give it a go. He walks past. I'm like, oh, you're going to got a couple of minutes to stop, please, mate. And he sort of laughs straight away. I was like, that's not a good sign. He sort of laughs to me, and he goes, I've got to go, mate. Sorry, I've not got time. Which players will use that excuse all the time when it's not really. I mean, sometimes if they're going off international duty, they do have to rush off. I mean, if it's going to be quick, they can spare it. But I understand it. It's not a criticism.
I can 100% know that he was lying to you, Keeno. He would not.
Most likely, but he's a good guy, Jorgen, and I don't hold it against him. And I sort of laughed, and the Wolves, media staff. We're talking like the guys that sort of high up at the club and stuff, and that run it and everything. And they start laughing as well. And then Jorgen sort of turns around while he's halfway down the corner. He's like, honestly, I don't have time. And he's like laughing. I'm like, Jorgen, it's fine, mate. Don't worry. Turn around, blah, blah, just chatting. and I looked to my left, and Jorgen's coming back the other way, back towards us up the corridor. And I'm thinking, oh, come on, here we go. He's coming back. And I go, oh, Jorgen, you come back for those 2 minutes. He went, oh, yeah, here we go. Yeah, I've come back. And then he goes, no, and just walks the other direction. Just walks off again. He was being led out the other direction of the stadium, and he comes towards me as if he's going to do it deliberately as a joke, and then walks off the other way. He wasn't being a bit of an idiot. He was taking the mick and being funny. It did give me a laugh, but he actually walked towards me and said, "Oh yeah, I've got time for that 2 minutes now," and then sort of walked off and started laughing. And I was like, "Okay, fair play. He's got a bit about him, I don't mind it." There was absolutely zero chance I was going to get it, but I thought, you know what, I've got to give it a go.
You've got to take the shots, Keeno. You've got to. You don't shoot, you don't score, mate.
Exactly, mate.
Just tell us your whole time down in the mix zone wasn't wasted. You did get to speak to at least one Wolves.
I did get Ladislav Krejci. Yeah, I spoke to him. He was good. Got some good stuff out of him. As I said, it did take a while for me to get anyone because they were just taking. Sometimes they just take ages in the showers and they don't come out. Normally,
do you reckon they've all teed it up, going, that Keeno's outside. Just
well, I mean, some of them will probably know that, yeah. But obviously, some players went past that. I didn't ask for interviews. Like, I didn't ask Jose Sarr because he normally never does it anyway. But I didn't ask Matt Doherty because he didn't play. I didn't ask a couple of those like Jalima, João Gomes. Sometimes not great with English. So I didn't ask him. People like that. I'll tell you what. One other thing, Donnarumma walked past me, and obviously all of these sort of big players have walked past him mixed in before. And I've seen Haaland before, and I'm like, bloody hell, he's huge. But Donnarumma walked past me, and he looked like he was 10 foot tall.
He's a big piece of kit, isn't he?
I was like, that's the biggest human being I've probably ever seen. He was massive. I was like, what the? I was like, gee. And he looked at me and was like, hello, you're right. I was like, you don't know who I am. I was just like, oh, you're right. Yeah, all good. He was just being polite, to be fair to him. But I was like, I could not believe how huge he was. It was outrageous. I mean, he's a good goalkeeper, don't get me wrong, but Christ.
Yeah, he's a big. He looks on TV like a big piece of kit. I'm sure you can take him down, mate, on the jiu-jitsu.
Well, I mean, I didn't want to. It would have been easy work, light work, but I didn't want to get myself in trouble. So I didn't want to hurt him as well. You know what I mean? It's one of those things.
There we go. That could be a new segment. Keeno's mix zone struggles. Hopefully, we'll hear more.
I've had plenty of them. Plenty of them over the years.
Hopefully, we'll hear more of them between now and the end of the season. Back to the action. It was a 2-0 defeat for Wolves, a battling display at Manchester City. There was a little bit of confidence surrounding the game that Wolves might be able to nick something, given the form, given City are kind of out of form and their terrible loss in the Champions League in the week, and obviously they lost the Manchester derby the week before, but it wasn't to be 2 first-half goals. Saw Wolves off, but like we said, they battled. They didn't roll over. It wasn't a heavy defeat, and Keeno. We'll start with the kind of the selection and the. And what Rob Edwards went with, because it was a little bit of a kind of surprise with the side he went with. No Strand Larsen, no Arakadore in the starting line. Kind of went with Hwang and Arias up front, which was the kind of the main kind of talking point from that selection. And did that kind of hamper Wolves in the first half? They've done so well in recent weeks with this kind of, if you want to break it down, little and large combination at the top end of the field with Hwang and either Strand Larsen or Arakadore. But he didn't do that this weekend. And albeit I know it was against City, but did it not kind of work? Did it just look a little bit disjointed?
Yeah, to be fair, I thought it was going to be Arias up there. Mane was the one that was a little bit more advanced, actually. I agree with you. I thought it would be Arias that would be the more advanced one, but he sort of moved Mane out of position a little bit. Look, let's go back to last week's podcast. I mean, we spoke about the Man City game and said the midfield's going to be huge. I'm not for a moment suggesting that Rob Edwards has listened to the podcast because I very much doubt it. But it seemed like he clearly thought the same thing, which hopefully means that we're spot on with the analysis. But yeah, he went sort of full in the midfield, went with that sort of counter-attack style in terms of the personnel that were chosen, and that sort of lines at what we were saying. Wolves have got to be compact defensively. You've got to be perfect on the counter. Like your first couple passes right, and that's why he sort of went with this side. And he also found his reasoning was that he felt that if Wolves we're going to go long and go to someone like Arakadore or Larsen, then you're more likely going to give the ball back to City, who are then going to come back at you again. So looking before the game at the reasons, and obviously post-match the reasons that Rob Edwards gave as well, it sort of all makes sense why he made that decision. And before the game, I've got to admit, the first thing I thought was, I'm not sure about not playing one of the strikers. And then I sat there and I thought about it for 5 minutes, and I said, I was chatting to some of the Wolves guys, and I went, actually, I don't mind it. I actually don't. I can see what he's trying to do, and so I have to maintain. I can't suggest that my mind was changed at any point. I have to maintain that I actually thought that it potentially was the right thing to do. Obviously, hindsight is 2020. You see it now, and you have to say that me and Rob were probably both wrong, really, because it didn't really work. Wolves, first of all, they weren't compact because they conceded within 6 minutes, and it was a really avoidable goal to concede as well. But then when they were defending, and look, City missed a few chances and could have got second a bit earlier in that first half as well. And when Wolves did get the ball back, they were trying to be quite brave on it, which I appreciated. The Wolves were trying to be sort of progressive with their passing and take a couple of chances. But when they got into those forward areas, all the balls that were being released into those forward areas, the accuracy was really, really bad. It was really poor. So when Wolves did that, they were just giving the ball away so easily, weren't able to find the players in the right positions. Hwang was incredibly isolated. Mane playing slightly further forward, it didn't really work. He looked a little bit disjointed in that position. And Wolves were just wasteful, was the way I would describe it. Jackson Tatchwood, again, only came off at half-time, and we'll come on to Rodrigo Gomes and his impact in a little bit. But he was really poor again as well. So all of Wolves' outlets in how this sort of system would work and this personnel decision would work, all of those outlets weren't able to get on the ball. And when they did get on the ball, it was in poor areas or the ball was given away too easily. And Wolves were just not able to sort of spring anything and connect anything together going forward. So, yeah, it didn't work. But I appreciate what was trying to be done, and I don't necessarily think it was the wrong decision, or it could have been maybe worked on slightly better, or sort of the players could have executed it slightly better, but it just didn't work on that day. And they had to make changes, and it was incredibly important to make those changes. And that, I think, for a much better second half.
Yeah, you talk about the second half. He made that double switch at the break. There was a lot more energy about Wolves, and credit to them. They've gone to City with all the power and attacking flair that they've got, and Wolves have actually created chances in that second half, which is a real credit to not just Edwards for making the changes, but the Wolves players could have been very easy to kind of roll over at that point.
Yeah, for sure. I think the fact that you've taken a bit of a chance, you've conceded within 6 minutes, really in a sort of pretty poor fashion. I mean, Mateus Nunes has answered the boos from the Wolves fans, obviously former Wolves player, by whipping in a fantastic cross. He gets the better of Hugo Bueno probably slightly too easily as well, although I thought Hugo Bueno had a decent enough game. It whips in a cross, and it's basically 3-on-1 in the box. Mosquera goes in with his head sort of relatively low and gets beaten to it by Marmoush, and it was just a really avoidable goal, I felt. So that was frustrating. You then get to the end of the half, and if Wolves get through 1-0 down, even with this sort of experiment, if you will, with the starting 11 not really working, you can probably say that it worked well enough. You know what I mean? You can get through to half time in the second half, 1-0 down, and think, okay, we've got something to work with here. But you can see that goal right at the end of the first half, which is a massive blow, really. And it was relatively well worked by City. I did think, and I thought there's a few times during the game that Krejci's positioning wasn't great, particularly in that first half. But the first touch from Semenyo out of his feet, and then the finish is obviously top class. So, yeah, frustrating timing really to concede that second. But as you mentioned, Wolves make the changes, and it worked. Jordan Larson comes on, and I know that Tolu's been playing ahead of him recently, but when you're making that change at half time and you're thinking, right, I'm going to bring one of the big strikers on this occasion, I thought it was the right decision to bring Larson on. I was pleased he did, and I think Larson reflected that actually with a good performance in that second half. So that was a plus. It just gave Wolves a bit of a focal point, a bit more of an outlet. He held the ball up well. I thought his interplay with those around him was really good. Sort of 1-2 touch stuff that just allowed someone like Mane, who then moved into that sort of midfield role again, sort of slightly deeper, which suited him a lot better. Rodrigo Gomes on the right, who came on right wing back for Tatchwood, I thought was excellent. And as I said, we're going to talk about him in sort of specific detail in a second. So all of those changes really did work, and I think Larson, specifically him coming on, really did make a bit of a difference for Wolves. But the big part of it, which created sort of a bit of that energy, or sort of renewed a bit of that energy and helped Wolves create chances, was Mane going a bit deeper. He looked a lot more comfortable playing in that sort of slightly deeper role that he's been playing in recently. It was also more on that left side as well, where he has been playing, whereas when he was basically up front with Hwang, he was a bit more on the right. So I think taking him back to where he had so much success in recent weeks made a lot of sense. And he looked really good in the second half. Made a couple of players look silly with a nutmeg and a couple of nice, neat turns. Good set pieces, which Mosquera came close on a couple of them. The fact that he's taking sort of ownership and responsibility and going to take corners and stuff. Like, I know he's a forward player and that's sort of in his wheelhouse, but he is still an 18-year-old kid going away at Man City, going and take that sort of responsibility on his shoulders. And all of those things I really liked. He had a really good second half, and Wolves could and maybe should have got a goal actually out of the game. Whether it would have been enough to go and get a result is tough to say, really, because City never really got out of first or second gear. They were a little bit sort of lackluster themselves by their own standards, really. But if Wolves did get a goal, you never know. You make that place nervy. Wolves have a bit of ascendancy, and they could have had an opportunity, but they just couldn't quite find that winning moment, or that goal scoring moment, if you will.
I just want to insert something in here. You mentioned about Mane there and playing in midfield. I think we've got to remember that Matheus Mane came into the Wolves squad as he was a forward playing in kind of the youth sides. And how much credit has to go to Rob Edwards for identifying that he could do a job in the middle of the park, and not just do a job, but kind of excel in that role at the age of 18, to the point where there's reports of kind of clubs looking at him, which is going to be because he's British, and that happens. There's always links when you're starring on the top stage. But the fact that he's not only identified maybe a better position for him, but he's kind of flourishing in it as well. I think that's, for me, looking at Wolves this season, that's the positives aren't long, but that is a huge one, really. And I think there's credit obviously to Mane, because he's the player that goes on the pitch and goes over the white line and does the job. But massive credit for Rob Edwards for identifying that this youngster can play in that position. Playing a central midfielder in the Premier League when it's not really a preferred position from youth football is a huge step.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and it's a kind of a niche position as well, because he is playing in midfield, but it's almost, depending on the players around him, it's almost that hybrid position. It's essentially a number 8, but then he does sort of float into that left channel and sort of mix it up a little bit with Hugo Bueno and Hwang Hee-chan, who runs those channels as well. He's got incredible energy, which you would expect an 18-year-old to have as well, but it's about using that energy in the right way and channeling it in the right way. And I think he does that really well. He's incredibly mature and professional for his age as well. And he's taken a lot of that. You talk about responsibility with corners. He's taken a lot of sort of interest and attention and responsibility on his young shoulders, and seemingly doing it with a lot of ease. And I think that's a massive credit to him. And as you mentioned as well, to Rob Edwards, because yes, it was a sort of needs-must situation away at Man United when Wolves, had no Andre and they had to go with João Gomez in midfield and sort of the two number 8s, makeshift number 8s, if you will, in Mane and Arias. But they'd also identified that those players could potentially do that and worked with them on it, and they've excelled in those positions. So yeah, he can definitely look at Mane's speciality, if you will, his talent does come in those forward areas. It wouldn't surprise me if next season in the Championship he does play further forward again, depending on the system we'll go with, because he is someone that is essentially a chance creator, a goal scorer, those kind of areas he needs to be in. But in this Wolves system at the moment, he's able to have a little bit of that license to do that while also being kind of disciplined defensively. And while it's working, So continue him in those positions. And look, he played further forward in that first half. He obviously played as a striker and as a winger and a sort of 10 and all those sort of 4 positions for the under 21s and under 18s. And it doesn't mean that he can't do that going forward. Just on this occasion, it didn't really work with the sort of the way Wolves were set up. But overall, yeah, he's been brilliant, hasn't he?
He certainly has. Let's talk Rodrigo Gomes. Came off the bench at the weekend. He's someone who obviously I know you're a fan of. I know the man who used to sit in this seat is a very, very big fan of him. Is it kind of his shirt to lose now, Keeno, and terms of Rodrigo Gomes, given his second half performance at City?
Yeah, I'm trying to not make this another section bashing Jackson Tatchell, because I don't want to, play be a broken record and just continue that old playbook of going after one player. So I will make this about Rodrigo Gomez, but I have to give the context, and the context is that Jackson Tatchell for me is not good enough, and he didn't play well again against City. Came off at half time, and I said this several podcasts in a row now. As soon as Rodrigo Gomez is able to start games and start them consistently, for me, it's his shirt, and he starts at right wing back. And the match at the Etihad only solidifies that for me, really. As I say, Touchwood didn't play well, but let's focus on what Rodrigo Gomez does bring. What he brings is, first of all, fantastic energy, fantastic attitude. I mean, I've interviewed him several times. Obviously, being around the place, you sort of speak to people and get a feel for people and what people are like. People that are at the club and no longer at the club, everyone has a glowing endorsement of what Rodrigo Gomez is like as a person and a player. He's the kind of person that every squad needs, really, who is just really good for the culture and the atmosphere. But as a player, he plays with that sort of attitude as well. Like, he's just so happy to be there, but he does it with a real enthusiasm and quality as well. From those wing-back positions, don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that he's perfect defensively, but I think he's got relatively good defensive instincts. He'll make mistakes. He's not the most physical. There's going to be things that Wolves will have to do to sort of protect him a little bit in those areas, but I definitely don't think he's bad at it by any means. But going forward is where he excels, really. Really, really good at making well-timed, intelligent runs, and he made a few really good ones down the right-hand side in that second half at City, where Wolves were looking sort of cross-field passes or through balls that were finding him and creating chances. So that is a massive plus. He's versatile. He can play in a few different positions, and he did in that second half as well. They brought Tolly on, and Wolves went to a back four. Mosquera went to right back, and Rodrigo Gomez went from right wing back to left wing, basically. It was basically a 4-4-2, or sort of a bit of a diamond in that midfield. And Rodrigo Gomez basically went to left wing. And he can do that with, again, speed, technical ability, arriving in good areas at the far post, getting crosses in. Again, not suggesting by any means that he's going to be perfect, but he's forward thinking, he's positive, and he's got technical ability. And I think those are the kind of things that Wolves need. So, yeah, I'm a fan of him. I think he's a good player. He's definitely not going to be perfect. He's going to make mistakes. He's going to have bad games. But I think consistently, he's going to be better than what we have at the moment. And for me, he's got to play.
Yeah, it was an impressive second half display from him. Keeno, I just want to slot something else in there. It was something that kind of hit the headlines over the weekend, and obviously went in Wolves' favour. But it was a VAR call at City, which was maybe not groundbreaking, but kind of a big move in terms of VAR. It was a debut for Faria Hallam in the middle, someone who's risen up through the Football League, through the Championship, into the Premier League, and he made a big call in the first half. There was a penalty shout for handball on Yerson Mosquera. He was sent to the monitor. When referees get sent to the VAR monitor, it usually only means one thing, that the decision is going to be overturned. But he stuck with his original on-field decision, which has been widely praised by everyone in football, apart from Pep Guardiola, who was particularly salty about it after the game, as he is about every single thing that goes against his team. I won't go down that rabbit hole. But I just want to get your view on it, really. It's gone in Wolves' favour, so everyone from a Wolves persuasion is happy. But, it's kind of a bit of a watershed moment, really, in terms of, I'm sure football fans probably thought, the unwritten rule for going over to a monitor was to overturn the decision. And I've never seen one not overturned. So I don't think there has been one. But what did you kind of make of it? It looks the right decision, but the fact that he's kind of had the bottle to stick with that rather than rolling over I'm sure was welcome by Wolves fans at the time, and retrospectively as well, because Wolves have been on the wrong end of some pretty controversial VAR calls over the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, with that, the history with VAR, no one really, from a Wolves perspective, is a massive fan of VAR. And you're right, when a referee goes over to the monitor, and particularly when it took more than 3 minutes for them to come to the decision, which is ridiculous in itself, and that is a side thing really, but that's a major reason why I don't like VAR as well. But that's a separate argument. But when you have that context in front of you, and it's a referee in front of a monitor with that kind of decision, and that's spending that amount of time, you expect it to be changed. You also then throw in that it's his Premier League debut. You've got more experienced officials in the VAR room suggesting that he takes a look at it. That again would make you think, well, he's going to change his mind here. Clearly, it's obvious. I'd be gobsmacked if he doesn't. For him then not to do that, to have the sort of bottle really to stick by his decision, I think is a really, really good. It's a really good thing for the game, really, but a massively glowing endorsement of him as an individual, because he's clearly got what it takes to referee at this level. Now, obviously, over time we will see, because he may go on and have bad officiating displays and may never, continue in the Premier League. But based on that individual assessment, I think that's a really good endorsement of him as a Premier League referee. And to add to that argument, I think he had a good performance as a referee for the whole game, not just that one individual incident. Obviously, no referee's going to get everything right. Human error is always going to be there, and I do appreciate it's a difficult job. But there are referees, and we've seen some recently at Wolves as well, that consistently make the wrong errors, then try and correct those errors during the game and make even more wrong calls, and then they just lose control really of a fixture, and they lose control of the game and the contest. At no point did Farai Hallam do that. I thought he had control of the game the whole way through. For the majority of his calls, I think he got right, and I was really pleased. And I think with the actual incident itself, he's clearly steadying himself and controlling it and sort of stopping himself, isn't he, Mosquera? He's clearly natural position for his arm. And obviously the way they're trying to address handballs these days is to be more lenient with things that are natural. So that makes sense. Secondly, it didn't even stop Marmoush from having the opportunity. That was an absolute tap-in that he missed. So it's not like, essentially if they did overturn it, it's like, well, Marmoush, you've got the chance. You missed it. Okay, you missed it. We'll blow back and give you another chance. No, that's not how it works. He's the chance is gone. It's been there and gone. Going back and changing that, I think, is wrong. And based on the individual handball anyway, for me, it wasn't a handball. So overall, it's a positive outcome. Something that we can speak, in glowing terms about officials. First time in a while, to be honest, because I'm normally quite critical. So yeah, definitely a good thing. I'm glad he's got the attention that it probably deserves from the football community as well, because I felt that it was the right call. It was brave as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, it certainly was. It was good to see. Right, before we come on to some questions, let's do a Liam Keane transfer window roundup update.
We've
got just over 7 days until the January. I don't think we should call it the January transfer window now, because it never closes in January, does it? But the
early Feb.
The winter window, we'll call it.
I do that quite. I like call it winter window, because exactly.
Yeah, the winter window slams shut at, I think it's 7 p.m. on today, on Monday, February the 2nd. Obviously, a lot to be going on. Keeno, let's talk about outs, then we'll talk about potential ins. Outs, do you know what? I'm going to rattle through the names as we did last week, and you can do a little bit of an update on the situation, because I know some things have changed. There's been a few developments over the last week, but we'll start with Fer Lopez. Looks to be on his way, Keeno, as reported this morning prior to recording this podcast.
Yes. Well, the first thing I'll say about all these players is keep up to date on. I mean, luckily we get the podcast out pretty quickly after recording it. But obviously, especially in the transfer window, things change quickly. So just keep up to date on expressthestar.com, my social media, @LiamKeane_star as well. Just because occasionally things will happen after we recorded and it might be slightly out of date. But as of Monday morning, recording this, Fer Lopez is a situation we don't expect to change, albeit you never know in football because things do happen. But he's in Spain as we speak. He landed last night. He's got his medical today. To return back to Celta Vigo, his former club, on loan until the end of the season. No buy option included. Celta Vigo paying his full wages until the end of the season. There's a small loan fee included for Wolves as well. And otherwise, it's a pretty straightforward move. No surprises, no hidden fees, if you will. So yeah, pretty straightforward. And for Wolves, and for the player, really, look, he's not going to get a lot of game time seemingly under Rob Edwards in the Premier League. Is to go and let him play, let him sort of get some minutes under his belt. They considered sending him to the Championship, and there was some interest there, but as I reported back in, I think, early December, Celta Vigo were interested in him to take him back on loan, and Wolves now, after a period of negotiation, have agreed to let him go there. So yeah, feels like for the player, it's probably the right thing, really, because physically he's got to improve a little bit as well. So yeah, I wish him well, and hopefully he'll come back and have a future with Wolves.
Talk to us about Emmanuel Agbadou, something that's been going on for quite some time.
Yeah, there's still those negotiations with Besiktas, and essentially from the last podcast, not loads has changed really. It's about whether Besiktas are willing to stump that money up. There will be interest from a few other clubs as well. If a club is willing to pay what Wolves want, which will be closer to what they paid for him, which was roughly 15 to 16 million pounds, then he'll be able to go on a permanent deal. So, and I think Wolves are fairly comfortable with their centre-back options as well, because with Totti coming back from injury relatively soon, they'll have 5 centre-backs if Agbadou was to leave. Obviously 6 if he stays. So if he does go, I think they'll be fairly comfortable with those options as well. So yeah, I think it's one that could still get done, but there's still a little bit of a way to go in the final week of the window.
Jorgen Strand Larsen, we had the news last week that a bid had been knocked back. It seems that Wolves are pretty firm on what they want for him, Keeno.
Yeah, it was. I think 30 million was mentioned in some media as that Leeds offer. I understand it to be more than 30 million, so it was a pretty substantial offer. Wolves want at least 40 for him. I suspect there'll be some add-ons negotiated there as well, and I fully expect. As I mentioned on the last podcast, there's a lot of work behind the scenes in terms of people outside of Wolves to try and make a move happen for Jorgen in this window. Leeds being the most likely club at the moment. There are other clubs at the table, Palace being one. West Ham and Forest have been at the table, but are sort of umdenard a little bit with other areas and other forwards they've looked at as well. But so there are lots of clubs at the table. I would fully expect in the last week of the window for there to still be some more movement with him here. Again, similar to Agbadou, he'll go if the money's right. If the money isn't right, Wolves are fairly comfortable with keeping him to the end of the season as well. But I think if a club comes in and pays that right money, then he'll be allowed to leave. So I'm expecting, I'd be surprised if there isn't another bid and some more movement here and another club or two pushing for him. But let's see which club's gonna bite first.
Let's talk about the midfielders, João Gomes and Andre. That one seemed, them two, even Keeno, seem to have gone a little bit quiet in recent days in the gossip.
Yeah, Andre in particular is a little bit quiet, and there's not loads to say on that at the moment. With João Gomes, nothing's massively changed from what I said previously, in the sense that Atletico Madrid wanted him, but João Gomes wasn't as keen. He really wants to stay in the Premier League. Similar with Napoli as well, who were at the table, but Wolves were João Gomes rather was less interested. Don't get me wrong. I mean, if those were options in the summer and there's no other options, I'm sure he'd be interested. But right now, he wants a Premier League move, if a move is going to happen at all. He's also not pushing to go because he's someone who, loves Wolves and appreciates Wolves and doesn't want to, be that person that's trying to force his way out. At the same time, as I mentioned previously as well, he wants to get in the Brazil squad. And there have been conversations with people at Brazil to suggest that you might struggle to get in if you're going to be at Wolves and you're bottom of the Premier League. So that's something that's going to be playing on their mind as well. So I definitely wouldn't say it's completely dead. Nothing's going to happen. I would say it's probably unlikely at this stage that he leaves in this window. But if there's some movement, some dominoes fall at other clubs and a Premier League club, which there is a few interested in him and are in the market for a midfielder and can make it work financially, then I wouldn't be surprised to see him go. But my instinct tells me this one probably waits till the summer now. It also depends if João Gomes turns around and changes his mind and decides to massively kick off and try and force a move. But I don't expect that to happen. I'd be surprised.
Juan, we talked about Juan and John Arias. We'll kind of wrap these into one. We talked about these last week. My guess is that these situations haven't maybe moved on any more from our last discussion on the poddy.
Yeah, again, two that I would suspect will be players that will go in the summer, really, because or at least have those negotiations in the summer. Because more than anything, Wolves haven't signed anyone yet. They've got a week to go in the window. They've got a few other players that may leave. I mean, the two most likely at the moment being Agbadu and Larson, of the most sort of senior players at least. And I just can't see a world where Wolves will sanction, another couple of pretty key players at the moment on top of that when they haven't got anyone else in. There's only so much that they're going to be able to do in this last week of the window, and I don't see Wolves going out and signing 3-4 players between now and the end of the window closing. So, with that in mind, I would expect those to be players to keep an eye on in the sort of next few months.
Any other business, Keeno? Any other business we don't know about before I close this meeting?
Closest meter, like it. Well, I mean, outgoing. That's where we're at really at the moment. I mean, let's look at incomings. So a name I can mention, I think it has been out there as well, is Philip Oteli. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Oteli, Nigerian forward at Basel, 26 years old. He's a player that Wolves like. He's a sort of winger forward position kind of player. He's a player they like. He's a player they've looked at. My understanding is that there has been any bids for him. Hasn't been any bids for him, to make that clear. I think I stumbled slightly over that. Make sure people understand what I'm saying. Hasn't been any bids for him. However, he is a player on sort of a list of players in those areas, those sort of positions that the Wolves are looking at. So yeah, potentially could be some movement there if they decide to make a bid for him. And those sort of areas are a position I would expect Wolves to bring a player in between now and the end of the window. So obviously, Phil Lopez is going out. Bellegarde should be back from injury for this coming game against Bournemouth at the weekend, according to what Rob Edwards has told us. He's back in training, should be back in the squad, which is obviously a plus. But I do think Wolves will still look to add a player in that area, in that sort of forward area. Might not necessarily be an out-and-out striker or an out-and-out winger. Might be someone that sort of fits into those sort of number 8 positions, or someone that can do a couple of those different positions, just to give Rob Edwards and Wolves someone fresh, but someone maybe a little bit different as well. So I'm expecting them to try and push for someone in those areas, particularly now that Phil Lopez is going, because the squad does need a little bit more depth. And then I think it will heavily depend really on players that go. If Agbadu goes, do they try and use some of that money to reinvest now? As I say, I'm not sure they'll necessarily be desperate for a centre-back, but perhaps another position. And then the great example of this is if Larson goes, Wolves, for me, have to bring a striker in. They have to go and get an out-and-out striker if Larson goes. I don't think you can leave the squad that short and not have another out-and-out striker. So that's my own opinion on that. So yeah, I think there's going to be a little bit of movement in this next week. But I'm not expecting wholesale changes. I'm not expecting 5 or 6 out, 5 or 6 in. But we could have a couple out and maybe a couple in as well over the next few days.
Yeah, watch this space. And there's 7 days to go. A lot can happen between now and the end of the transfer window. Right, let's have a shout out for our sponsor. As always, the E&S Wolves podcast is brought to you by University of Wolverhampton at the Halls. And here's a bit of a rundown of some of their top events that are coming out. Tickets are on sale now for all of these events. The Northern Soul Orchestrated is heading to town on the 14th of March, following the huge success of the Northern Soul Orchestrated tour last year. Writer and BBC Radio 6 broadcaster Stuart McConey, alongside the BBC Concert Orchestra and Manchester composer and conductor Joe Duddle, will return with new dates in March. Those tickets are on sale now. What's Love Got to Do with It? A show, an electrifying tribute show celebrating the music and unparalleled 60-year career of the one and only Queen of Rock and Roll, Tina Turner, is in town on the 28th of March. There's an ultimate classic rock show. You can dust off your air guitars for an evening of the very best classic rock albums of legends past and present. That is taking place on the 29th of May. And if you're a pop fan, if you want to roll back the years to the 90s, Blue are back together and they are back in town. Simon Webb, Duncan James, Anthony Costa and Lee Ryan getting ready to make new memories with the news that they will release their all-new studio album Reflections, and they are touring and heading to Wolverhampton on the 22nd of May. So if any of those take your fancy and you want to get your hands on tickets, do head over to thehallswolverhampton.co.uk. Right, let's move on to some questions.
Some good tunes in there, by the way, mate, as well.
Good tune. Which one are you on about?
Well, I mean, what's Love Got to Do with it? A bit of teen,
yeah,
but also Blue have got some bangers, to be fair.
I'm not saying a word. Right, let's move on to questions.
Fair play. All rise.
Everyone's got different tastes, haven't they? But we'll move on swiftly to questions. Teddy Hall has got in touch. Thank you for your question, Teddy. He said, what do you believe made the Wolves recruitment team give the green light on Chachua? I don't see how a Premier League club can think that he could improve their 11/be of a good enough standard. I understand he wasn't the number one target on their list, but you would find a more effective right wing back in League One. It's quite a scathing assessment there from Teddy. What do you make of that one, Keeno?
Yeah, I realised I said I didn't want to go too, be banging the drum.
Yeah, you're going to have to,
slagging him off, and then I'll put this question in there. So, look, I mean, I can't disagree with a lot of it. I mean, obviously, probably a little bit hyperbolic suggesting his League One standard. He's obviously a bit better than that, but he's not good enough for the Premier League, in my opinion. I'd be interested what happens in next year, really, because he could be a player that's part of your squad, really, in the Championship. Because I mean, he might get a loan back to Italy, maybe, or go for a handful of £1 million rather than the 10 million you paid for him. But no one in the Premier League is going to take Jackson Tatchwell. I'd be very surprised. Yeah, I mean, it comes back. You are right. He definitely was not the number one target in that position. But it also comes back to just that recruitment in the summer in general. Totally disjointed. No idea if they're coming or going. No forward planning. No idea what money's available to buy which player. Just all over the place. So it sort of it reflects on that really more than Tatchwood, to be honest, because there's only so much you can do really.
Sean has asked, I understand the need to offload players in the summer with relegation. With your recent article about wage reductions and no relegation release clause, why is it, or should it be assumed, that all sales will should be well below market value? I hope you can make sense of that, Keeno.
I understand what you're saying. Yeah, in fact, it wasn't my article. It was a different journalist that had written an article, but I'd actually said that information on the podcast about a month or two before that. So that might be where the confusion is. But I had said it previously. So the information being that no relegation release clauses in any of the players' contracts at Wolves, and they'll all be getting very heavy wage reductions, anywhere from sort of 25 to 50% wage reductions, depending on individual player contracts going down into the Championship. Essentially what you're asking is, why would Wolves get less money for some players than they would do now, for example? Now, it's not necessarily going to be the case, but my argument would be that I think that is likely for certain players, depending on the market available to them or for them, being that certain players like Wolves' bigger stars, Larson, Andre, João Gomes, etc., they're not going to play in the Championship. So Wolves are going to have to offload them. And once there's a little bit of that sort of player power coming into it, and Wolves are not from a strong negotiation standpoint, they're strong negotiation standpoint in the sense that the players are under contract with them. But other than that, Wolves don't come from a position of strength to negotiate more money when a player is desperate to go and there are a few buying clubs there to take them. Now, I don't think Wolves are going to sell on the cheap necessarily. They'll still get good money for these players, but I think you could, on some of them, particularly someone like João Gomes, I would argue you could probably get more for them in January if there was a club that was desperate to take them. But there's a lot of ifs and buts there as well. So yeah, I think overall, I would like Wolves probably to be a little bit more bullish in the window at times, and maybe they'll need to be. Sometimes you're going to have to turn around to a player and say, "You're under contract with us. Suck it up. You're going to have to play. It is what it is. You're under contract. You're here. You're being paid." At the same time, no player. I know they get paid ridiculous amounts of money, and you can't have a lot of sympathy for them. But you've got to look at it from their perspective. No player is going to want to do the same job next season, playing more games for less money. Because they're having a massive wage reduction. A lot of them won't want to play in the Championship because they think they're better and they think they're Premier League players. And what it is, and I've used this phrase before, and I've used this phrase a few times, which I think is really important to mention. Let's be brutally honest about this. In the summer, it's going to be a race for all of these agents as to who can get their player out of Wolves quickest. And the agents that don't do it quick enough or don't have the market there to get their player out will have unhappy players that are going to have no choice but to stay at Wolves, because Wolves can't lose 100% of their squad. They'll lose a big chunk of it, more than the majority, I would argue, but they can't lose every single one of them. And that, unfortunately, is going to be the reality of it. So it's going to be a incredibly busy and interesting summer, because there's going to be a lot of players that are going to be trying to get themselves out, and there'll be a lot of information being leaked because agents will be trying to get players out.
NNIM Wolves said, keen or not keen? Did Nathan Judah move to America once he saw Wolves' poor start to the season to avoid the press boxes and food options at EFL clubs, as they don't meet his lofty standards?
He's probably nailed the timing, hasn't he? Well, I mean, we know he was picky with his food. I'm less picky, but I do like to moan occasionally. I mean, I think there'll be plenty of Championship clubs where it'd be okay, won't there?
There's some good stuff, mate.
There's some good stuff. I'm not going to starve. I'll be all right. Yeah,
you'll be fine, mate. Liam Keane will always find something to eat. You know, this man, I've rarely seen people eat like this man at football matches. But
I can put it away, can't I? To be fair,
he can put it away. To be fair, he can put it away. Steve Bromley has said, I cannot see any way we start this season. Do you think the remaining days of the transfer, I think we should say transfer window there, do you think the remaining days of the transfer window should be focused on bringing in Championship-ready players to get a head start on other clubs?
Yeah, it's a good question. It sort of comes back to what I've been saying recently about a little bit of my sympathy for this window in the Wolves, in that it is not an easy window to do business in. I know all of us, fans and everyone else alike, would be desperate for Wolves to do a load of business, either give it a go or start preparing for next year, whatever it is you want to do. And I understand that. But the reality is that it's not an easy window for Wolves to do business in. Not just because it's January and that it's that old sort of stereotype of the January window, but it's because, you know, how do you target a player? Do you target them as we're giving it a real good go to try and pull off the Great Escape, or we're preparing for next year, you're going to be a Championship player? Do you go for experienced Championship players that maybe would want to be at the top end a Championship club now that could do well? Or do you go for players that are younger, got a point to prove? So I think there's a real fine balance to find here. And I do genuinely appreciate that it's a tough window to do business in. However, and I think this is sort of a larger point that I think answers the question at the very end of that question about sort of planning, really, is that, in my opinion, and I've said this plenty of times, Wolves' forward planning in transfer windows in recent years has been really poor, and they've got to do it better. And there's a phrase, I've been chatting to a few people about this, and there's a phrase that someone else has used that I'm going to steal that I think is a really good phrase for it. I can't remember if I've mentioned it on the podcast or not, but forgive me if I have. Spinning plates. Wolves don't spin enough plates. Wolves are not preparing for this window and thinking about the window that's coming up behind them, that's creeping up. And they're thinking about what's going to happen to XYZ player and have lists here and plans here. It's never happened or at least in the last few years, never really happened properly under Jeff Shee. There's a good recruitment department there that are trying to, you know, do their work properly, and it never really worked under Jeff Shee, who was just making occasionally decisions on the whim or thinking he knew better than people that had worked in football for, you know, 15, 20 years. So that is the big mistake that I think Wolves have made. It's now whether that's going to change or not. It's now whether, you know, Nathan Shee, at the moment interim, although you could of course have it on a permanent basis, whether he's going to, you know, make a change to that forward planning, listen to the people around him. As I say, it's a bit early really to give a proper answer on that, but that's what Wolves have to change. They've got to use the football people properly. They've got to forward plan better. And if they do that, all of a sudden, big things happening like, you know, Mateus Cunha being sold or, you know, losing a manager, whatever it is, you can deal with whatever situation is thrown at you. But at the moment, Wolves are struggling to deal with a lot.
Adrian has said, only positive of the season is Mane's emergence. Shall we try and bring in some more youngsters and give them a go?
Yeah, I understand the sort of thought process behind that question. It's, you know, it's the same. I think someone else mentioned about, you know, we're giving Mane too much limelight. Let's try and save him for next season. It's like, no, you've got to play him. He's doing well. You can't not play him now. He's going to get attention regardless. And of course, he's done fantastic. There isn't loads really in that academy at the moment that are really sort of knocking at the door for that next chance. There's a few that are in there. I mean, Ojanaka's gone on loan to Shrewsbury. I think he came off the bench from the other day at the weekend and played. So there'll be players there that are going to, be sort of trying to get themselves through. Ethan Sutherland's one that's been in and around it occasionally. There's not. They've just sold Fletcher Holman. He was a striker that was doing okay, but maybe wasn't quite at Premier League level. But there's not anyone really that's grabbing it. I mean, Twana Touré was the next one, but he's a little bit older now. Wouldn't surprise me if he got a move at some point. So, yeah, there's not really anyone that's grabbing the ball by the horns. And just to finish this point, this really is massive credit to Mane, because how many players have we seen come through the academy and do relatively well? I mean, Hugo Bueno's one. He's the only other one that's come through and played regularly. But Joe Hodge, I quite like Joe Hodge. Not really been able to kick on. He's gone out and he's playing in Portugal. Nathan Fraser hasn't worked. Leon Chiwami's got bad injuries, unfortunately. Luke Kundle gone out and permanently now and playing in the Championship. So certain players haven't quite been able to make that step up. And I've always said I don't want to put too much pressure on them, because if you're not a generational talent like a Wayne Rooney, it's difficult as a teenager to come into the Premier League and perform. I'm not suggesting that Mane is a Wayne Rooney level player, because I think that's unfair on him. But what he is clearly a step above a lot of these other players that have come through recently, because he's the one at the moment that is really taking his opportunity and starting every week.
Final question of the pod comes from Ben Golden. Who makes up the recruitment team? And other than João Gomez, Andre, plus Mendes deals, have they made any truly successful first-team signings in the last few years?
Well, it's a good thing I mentioned the recruitment department a second ago, because I can now talk about it properly. I think it's a little bit unfair to suggest that they haven't, brought any other good players in, because obviously Matt Hobbs was at the club previously as sporting director. He works closely with the recruitment department. Of course, as I say, they won't have got everything right, because there were players that haven't worked. But the biggest problem was that they weren't necessarily always being listened to. Jeff Shee would use Mendes. He would have his own opinions on things. He would make his own final decisions. And it wasn't always the recruitment department and the scouts that I'm going to mention that were necessarily being consulted on certain deals, or weren't their suggestions on players weren't necessarily being taken as seriously. Because I can tell you now, there was a long list of players that have gone on to other Premier League clubs in the summer window that Wolves and their recruitment staff were looking at, and Jeff Shee didn't bite at. So that tells you the full story. But just to give a very quick rundown, so we've got Ben. So we've got Ben Wrigglesworth is the head of scouting. He's then sort of supported or leads it alongside Elliot Sutcliffe, who's the senior recruitment lead, I think is his full title. And then they've got loads of sort of data analysts and video scouts at Compton, who they all work with. That then sort of bleeds into a larger team that's sort of, I suppose, a scouting network is the way to phrase it, which is across the sort of globe, really, across the world, loads of main markets, scouts all over the place. Using data, video, live scouting to sort of try and find the next, big thing, or the players for certain positions. They obviously all then report back into the people at the top of the football club, and obviously Matt Jackson being technical director. And then this is really important to mention. There is a secondary. It's not separate, but it's obviously slightly different because it's academy based. But there is a secondary sort of scouting structure for the academy. And that's its whole sort of extensive department in itself, which with plenty of full-time staff and some part-time staff. That's led by someone called Harry Human. His name will have cropped up for Wolves fans before, because he has been mentioned previously for various players. I won't go into loads of detail, because I'm hopefully in the process of writing a sort of article about this at some point. But Harry Human was really key in bringing Mateus Mane to the football club as well. So really important to give him a little bit of credit there as well. And when I hopefully am able to get the information to put the story together that I'm planning, I will, speak about it in a bit more detail on the podcast as well. So yeah, there is some good people in there that are doing some good work at the football club. Let's just hope that they're utilised properly, because they weren't previously, and that's been my biggest criticism.
Wolves fans, thank you very much for your questions. Almost out of time here. Time for Keeno to give us his preview of the weekend. Bournemouth coming to town. Chance for Wolves to increase that points tally a little bit further. Keeno, give us your preview. Give us your score prediction.
Well, it's always nice. The Wolves' next game is against the team that's just scored a 95th minute winner against Liverpool and won 3-2 at home. So Bournemouth will be on a high. I mean, they've obviously had a slightly more difficult spell of it recently as well, and that'll be a big win for them. But I do think they've got some good players. I do think they've got a good manager, and by all means, they're not going to be an easy opponent. However, I'm not for a minute suggesting the Wolves are going to stay up this season. No, I don't think anyone seriously believes that can happen. But if they were to pull off something that was unbelievable, first of all, they kind of needed to win the Everton and Newcastle draws they just had. They probably should have won both of those. Secondly, if you are going to do it, looking forward from now onwards, you kind of need to win this game, don't you, as well, against Bournemouth. You're back at home. Bournemouth side, a decent side, but can definitely be got at, can be beaten. And I think Wolves have got to go and win that, in my opinion. And it's going to be interesting exactly what he goes for. I think he'll go for the same system. I think he'll go back to a main striker. My guess would be it will be Tolu Arakadari alongside Hwang. Of course, it depends what happens in the next few days with transfers as well, because it could be Larsson's last game. He might already be gone by that point, or maybe there might be an agreement that he is sticking around. Anything could happen between now and the weekend. But assessing it right now, I would suggest that Tolu probably plays. And then it's a couple of other decisions for them to make. I think right wing back, for me, Rodrigo Gomes has to start, particularly at home. You know, you're forward-thinking, aggressive, attacking, and you're at home. You want to go win the game. Rodrigo Gomes, for me, is your player for that position. I don't think there's loads of other decisions, really, other than back to the midfield. I think the same system will be played, but do you play just one of João Gomes, Andre, and then you play Mane and Arias in front of them? Or do you go with both of them again, and then you drop one and drop one of either Arias or Mane? I would guess it would be Arias being dropped. That's a really key decision. I would suspect he'll probably drop Arias and play João Gomes, Andre, and Mane all in there. But that, for me, is another really interesting one. And hopefully, if all goes well, we might have a signing or two that will make their debut in the squad. But yeah, it's a really interesting game for me, because it's one that I think for Wolves is actually very winnable, but they have to get it right and they have to turn up on the day.
They certainly do, Keeno. They certainly do. But like we said, another chance to creep closer to that Derby record. Get that gone. We can stop talking about that then. And
please. And
yeah, you can maybe hunt down 19th place in the table. You never know. You never know at all. Keeno, good to see you as always, mate.
Well, let me throw a prediction out there quickly.
Go on then.
I'm not done the prediction yet. Let me go with Wolves to win 2-0.
Wolves 2-0. Look at that confidence.
I'm going to go for it. I think
the change in your confidence over the last few weeks is pretty rude.
My outward confidence is maybe not quite as the same as my inner confidence on this one, but I'm going to be positive. I'm going to go for it. I think if they can get it right back at home, I think this is a beatable Bournemouth team. So I think they can do it.
2-0 and a clean sheet. 2 goals and a clean
sheet as well.
Keeno.
Yeah, I know.
Huge.
I mean, it would have been a better bet really to go for both teams to score, but I'm going to stick with 2 clean sheets at home in the last 2. I'm going to go for a third 2-0 win.
2-0 victory there. Hopefully that comes off for you Wolves fans. Keeno, like I said, good to see you again. Be careful in those mix zones. Just keep an eye out for the cameras that are on you next time.
They need to be careful of me rather than the other way around. Be fine.
Wolves fans, thanks for your questions. Thanks again for listening. We do appreciate it. We'll be back next week after the end of the transfer window. So do join in. But until then, from me and Keeno on the E&S Wolves podcast, goodbye.
Wolverhampton Wanderers, hopefully this time they can do the business.